All right, so now you can see that this image looks better and I can zoom in, zoom out like this, okay? And I'm just going to be talking about that also. I'm doing that with two of my fingers. So just like you're used to zooming in, zooming out by pinching it in and out with two of your fingers, or like your thumb and your forefinger, just like any other app, all right? Now, before I say anything else, one thing that I would like to point out is that in case you found that you switched on that rotation mode on your phone and you turn your phone to the horizontal landscape orientation, but Snapseed did not change along with that. That happens sometimes in this app, okay? The solution to that is just close Snapseed or just minimize it by pressing the home screen icon. And when you're on the home screen of your phone, just turn that around. And once it turns around, then open Snapseed and you'll find that you've got the correct orientation. Okay, sometimes it just happens. So that's the way around it. But once we are here, now this image looks much bigger and we will be able to see things much more clearly. Now, just like we had those tools on the bottom, they have been moved towards the right side. For example, now the captions or the labels have disappeared, but it's still the same thing. For example, this first tool here on the right, that is your styles. Okay, so like I said, we are not interested in this right now. We are interested in the middle portion, which is this pen icon, which is the tools. So we will be selecting our first panel here, which is the tune image panel. Okay, and we're going to be seeing what this does. Now, one thing that you're going to notice is straight away on the left side, you see this frame, right? What this frame stands for is, for example, if I were to zoom into this image, again, by using two of my fingers, and you can see that now if I move around this frame, it just allows me to navigate inside the frame, okay? Right now, what I want you to do is just zoom out till the time you see the whole image, okay? And so that you can see, instead of that frame, you can actually see the histogram on the left side. So this is the same histogram that you're used to seeing when you shoot your own photos. It comes in the cameras also, and it tells you which areas are brighter, which areas are darker. And I'm going to be talking more about that. And that's going to be important in this particular panel because we will be tuning the tones here, okay? Right, so first of all, how does Snapseed work? What's the most basic way by which it works? Well, it has a very simple way of working, which is that now I'm inside the tune panel. Each panel has multiple settings. But right now, if you see on the top, we can only see the brightness setting. So where are the other settings? Well, you just have to touch the photo and move your finger vertically like this, and you'll be able to see then the different settings, which we're going to go through one by one. And the first one you can see is brightness. Once you select a particular setting, if you move your finger then horizontally across the image like this, you can see that the top bar changes the value of that particular setting. You can make the more bright in this case like this, or you can make it darker like this. And this is how Snapseed works. The vertical movement will allow you to change the setting and select the setting, and the horizontal movement will allow you to change the value of that setting. So pretty straightforward and a very, very good way to edit your photos, okay? Now, the second thing I want to talk about is the histogram on the left. So the histogram is going to be slightly important when you make any changes to any tones in any editing software, because the reason for that is you might have a different phone, someone else might have a different phone. The calibration of the tones, the resolution, the colors that you see with your eye might be different than what is seen on other screens. So when we slightly at least use the histogram for our reference, what we are doing is we are taking out the subjectivity from the editing and making it more objective, so that when we see this same photo, edited photo on different screens, we won't be surprised that it looks very different or it's not technically correct, because we are also going to be looking at the histogram when we make these changes, and we are not simply going to be eyeballing things because of the variety of the screens that we have these days. So the histogram just make things more objective, okay? So how does first of all, even before I talk about the histogram, let's just get rid or at least just talk about one of the settings, which is not very important, which is if I just, next. So first of all, on this middle bar down below, you can see that if I click on this, I can, the tools, the tuning image icons, I can access the settings, right? Also on the right side, you'll see something like a stick with some stars on it, like a magic wand. Okay, if I click on this, it's just basically gonna edit the whole thing automatically. This is the auto way of correcting the tones in our shot. So you can see if I click on it, boom. But usually you can see it doesn't do a good job. So I'm going to press undo here, okay? And you should not worry about the auto setting in most of the cases, because we are going to be doing things manually, okay? So let's get started with the first setting, which is going to be brightness. That's already selected here. So you can see that overall, the problem with this photo is that the foreground is slightly darker and the sky is fine, right? Because the sky is brighter. And this is a very common problem in photography. This is where HDR photography, high dynamic range photography, comes into play. But we will be able to replicate that by using these settings, right? So first of all, I just think the overall brightness, we can just slightly underexpose this shot. Maybe we'll just raise it slightly, okay, but not too much, because we are actually not going to be working with universal adjustments too much in this course. The real magic of editing lies in local adjustments. That means we can select certain areas and then only edit those. For example, here, the main problem is the foreground, that the hut and the trees and all these things are slightly darker. So we want to be able to only raise the brightness of those, which is very, very easy. But right now, just raise the brightness slightly. Now, if I was to raise the brightness too much, okay, see, like if it becomes too bright, just notice what happens on the histogram on the left side. You can see that the peaks of the histogram, which represents basically the tonal values inside the shot, they start to go towards the right side. Okay, what this means is that the right side of the histogram represents the brighter tones like the highlights or complete whites. Complete whites are like where you lose the details so much that there's nothing there except for a white pixel. You've actually lost the detail or the actual pixels from the image. Okay, so obviously we should avoid such peaks on the extremes. For example, if I do the other thing now, if I go towards the left side and make it darker, you'll see the opposite happens, because the left side of the histogram represents the darker tones like the shadows, and when you lose the details, they turn completely black. Okay, so right now you can see that a lot of areas, there's actually nothing there. If you were to take out a printout of this photo, you would just get black pixels in these darker areas of the hut and some of the trees. That's what the histogram is trying to tell you, that avoid such extreme peaks. So I'm going to bring it back to something like this, okay? Our job usually is to the best kind of histograms are usually the ones in which you get these peaks slightly more centered, like the center part of the histogram is like a mountain, basically, okay? And you avoid peaking too much on the extreme so that you don't lose your data on the picture. Right, now, this is about the brightness. I'll just increase it slightly more. Let's go on to the next setting. So I'm going to make that vertical movement, and I'm going to select contrast. Now, what does contrast do? Contrast increases the brightness of the brighter areas, and it makes the darker areas darker. So brighter areas become brighter, darker areas become darker. I want you to guess what will be the effect when I crank up this contrast on the histogram. Remember, bright things become brighter, dark things become darker. What do you think will happen to the histogram? Let's see. I'm going to increase the contrast really, really too much and just see what happens to the histogram. Because the bright areas became too bright, the peaks are on the extremes now, because the darker areas also became darker. So there's too much contrast. Now, contrast is something that you should usually use when the image is slightly faded. Okay, in this case, we already have good amount of contrast, so we're not really going to be using contrast here too much. Okay, then we have saturation, which is pretty easy to understand. It's just going to saturate your colors like this. So if you found the picture was a bit dull, you can add some colors. Or if I just do it this side, kind of gives that vintage look now, okay, which can be appealing in certain food photography, portrait photography. It's a kind of a vintage look, but we have much better filters for that later on, which I'm going to be showing you. You can also turn this completely black and white, but we also have a black and white tool for this job, which is much better. So right now, I feel the saturation here, we're just going to add a bit of colors. That's it. And anytime you want to see the changes and compare the before and after, there's this little icon on the right that you can see here, which is like a window with a line on it, like a rectangle and a line dividing it. That just tells you it's comparing the before and after. So if I just click on it, you can see that this is what we started off with, and you can see we made some subtle changes, right? Now, the main problem, like I said before, is that our shadows are dark, too dark. We really need to, you can see some certain parts of the hut are not being seen, okay? So the next option is something that is kind of unique to Snapseed. This is not really there in Lightroom and Photoshop and its other competitors, okay? And they've specifically made this tool, the ambience tool, because their own website says that this is to be used in scenarios which are backlit. What is backlit scenario? It's very famous in photography where the light is stronger behind and therefore something in front, which is in the foreground, becomes darker. right? So you can see if I increase the ambience, what it's going to do is it's going to just balance out that particular thing. That means problem was what? The sky was too bright and the foreground was too dark. If we increase the ambience, think of it like this, it takes a bit of brightness away from those bright skies and shares it with the foreground, okay? But I usually don't like to use this ambience tool because it's still just a single slider. We don't have complete control over the foreground and the background. So you can use ambience if you want. There's nothing wrong with it, but a better way is to go to the next setting, which is highlights. Okay, now what is highlights? If I increase the highlights, it's only gonna increase the brightness of the brighter areas. And if I decrease the highlights, it's only gonna make those areas darker which are bright, which in this case is the sky. So just keep an eye. If I increase this, mainly the sky becomes too bright, right? Now the sky is already bright, so we don't want that. We want to actually take a bit away from this. So you can see if I start to move this towards the left, just see how beautiful the details in the sky become. Why? Because they were overexposed, and now we have localized this editing and we're only taking away the brightness from this particular bright area, which is the clouds and the sky. So if I check the before and after, can you see? Boom. Fantastic. You can see that beautiful texture which was being overexposed, and it really did not affect the foreground too much. Okay, but we really need to increase the exposure of the foreground also now, because this is a kind of a backlit photo. So we're going to go to the next setting, which is the opposite of highlights, which is shadows, which only works with the darker tones. And if you keep an eye on the histogram, just see what happened after we changed the highlights. Those peaks slightly moved away from the extremes and have started to go towards the center. This automatically means we're getting an image which has those tones rich in the middle, okay, which is something that we want. And it's only going to become better when we increase our shadows also, because then the foreground and all those beautiful details in the hut which are hidden right now, especially towards the left side of the hut, will start to come up. Just see this. Fantastic. Wow. Just 2 settings literally changed the look and feel of this photo. Just see the before and after. Boom, this was what we started off with, and literally with just highlights and shadows, because we really did not change anything else. We've gone from this to this. Fantastic. And you can see the histogram now starting to kind of move towards the center part a bit. And the last setting here is warmth, which is not too important. It's just going to add more warmth or make it more cooler. This we'll be doing with a separate tool which is called temperature. We'll also be that time talking about things like white balance, color balance. The tune panel, this particular panel is not too great for this particular edit, okay? Right now I feel this tuning panel we are done with. So whenever you're done with something, you can just press this tick icon here, the check mark, and boom. Now we are ready to move to the next panel.